I don't know. To me, it sounds very much like I am not in touch with my own mental health, and so I'm going to shit on other people who are confidently and openly owning their struggles and their difficulties with mental health. Okay, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming back. We're doing a video today where we are answering questions from Reddit. We've never done this before, but there is actually a lot of resources for mental health stuff on Reddit, but there's also a lot of questions about mental health and therapy and stuff like that. So I have not heard or seen any of these questions, so hopefully I don't just like not have answers for these. I guess we'll find out. Aaron is going to read me the questions. I don't know if I'm going to leave his voice in or not. I might edit it out. Okay, question number 1.
It's not so much a question as it is a topic.
Okay.
There seems to be a culture or an understanding, especially with Gen Z, that having depression is a badge of honor, and they are more open about it, but some people use it as a personality trait.
Okay.
And
or at least that's what the Reddit hive mind seems to think.
That consumes their identity.
Okay.
I remember the other point, sorry.
What?
Is that it's not a competition. Depression isn't a competition, and mental illness, and it's not about all the things you have, but that you're working on it. Everyone's working on themselves. Okay,
yeah. So I've seen a lot of stuff about this on the internet broadly, and this idea that Gen Z or the younger generation seems to be leaning into mental health too much, which, I mean, I won't lie, I'm initially like really repulsed by that idea. Because to me that just sounds like a very boomer thing to say, or like a very neckbeard thing to say. I don't know. To me it sounds very much like I am not in touch with my own mental health, and so I'm going to shit on other people who are confidently and openly owning their struggles and their difficulties with mental health. But I do kind of hear what people are saying in terms of this criticism that depression shouldn't be your entire personality, and especially the competition factor there, or the idea of like, a friend of mine called it the oppression Olympics, this idea that like I'm sadder than you are. That's kind of problematic, and that's definitely like a toxic behavior. In that developmental stage, the one-upper behavior is pretty common. Actually, I don't know, because I wonder too, that behavior, it to me sounds like it's motivated from a place of invalidation. A lot of times people have the tendency to feel compelled to demonstrate the severity of their condition when people around them are not accepting or validating of what they're going through. So like, for example, a teenager who's depressed and whose mom and dad say that depression isn't real, you can't be depressed if you just get your ass up off the couch and go do something. It makes sense then that that kid would go to school and have this kind of competitive nature with other kids, like, oh yeah, well I'm so depressed that I X, Y, and Z. So I think this might be one of those things that evaluating and unpacking the root cause of the issue is more important than moralizing or trying to unpack or like dissect the actual behavior and the manifestation of the core issue. Yeah, I don't know. I think the tendency to sort of look down on the younger generation and this idea of like leaning too far into mental health really just comes from a place of insecurity and a place of unhappiness with one's own mental health being unsettled. Okay, question number 2.
Okay. This came from someone who recently was broken up with. Mm-hmm. This is basically shorthanded. Mm-hmm. Am I doomed to be alone if I am a chronic worrier? They essentially had 2 failed relationships. Mm-hmm. Their partner contributed that to being one of the reasons why they didn't want to be with them anymore. Okay. I feel I always fall short of others' expectations.
Okay, and this is actually a common thing that comes up for clients of mine too, this fear that your mental illness, whether it's anxiety or being a chronic worrier, or depression or whatever, that's a contributor to your relationship not being functional. This is sort of a twofold answer. The uncomfortable truth here is that we all have to take responsibility for our own behavior. Even if we have mental illness or trauma or unsettled shit, we at the end of the day are all still responsible for our behaviors and the consequences of those decisions. But it is also important to validate the idea and the fact that mental illness is not a disqualifying condition for being worthy of love. If you are mentally ill, if you have depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, personality disorders, etc., you're still worthy of love. You are still just as likely to find a relationship that's happy and healthy, as long as you're able and willing to make good on that first caveat that you have to be responsible for the consequences of your decisions. So, for example, if a person is chronically depressed and they struggle with fatigue, low motivation, and difficulty getting out of bed, a lot of times those symptoms make it really difficult for a person to actually show up to social obligations that they've previously agreed to. We can validate the fact that this behavior is coming from the mental illness. The person didn't choose to not show up because they don't give a fuck about you or because they're rude. The person didn't show up to this social obligation because getting out of bed felt like running a marathon and it was just too much. The caveat with that is that if you're the person with depression who struggled to show up to the event, you still have to own the fact that your behavior ultimately contributed to the pain of somebody else. Not showing up to an obligation that you previously agreed to be at is hurtful. You probably hurt somebody's feelings and you have to own that. That doesn't mean that we have to assign a moral label or a value to that behavior, but it is okay for the person who got stood up for brunch to say, wow, that really hurt my feelings and I didn't like that. And so you have to be willing to make space for that and to be like, yeah, no, I hear you. I understand why you're upset. I completely understand why you would feel hurt or upset or frustrated or angry because I agreed to go to this thing and ultimately I didn't go. There are still like workarounds for things like that. Like for example, if you have a partner who is chronically depressed and struggles to show up to dates, maybe it's a good idea to check in with them 24 hours before, a few hours before, and let them know, hey, how are you doing? I'm here for you and I just wanted to make sure that you're still feeling up to going out. If that's not the case, I can come over, I can cuddle with you in bed, or if you need space, we can just text, or maybe I can just drop something off at your door and, no questions asked, I'll just leave you be. But this is what I mean, that like mental illness is not a disqualifying condition for being worthy of love, because you might have to work around stuff and do things in a more creative way, but that doesn't mean that you can't have a happy, healthy, functioning partnership just because you have mental illness. Question number 3.
Okay. This is pandemic related.
Okay.
Just graduated, but feeling incompetent because I can't get a job, depressed, feeling like my life isn't going anywhere. Family says, at least you don't have it as bad as others.
So this specific question is pandemic related for sure, but I think the idea of this is also something that shows up a lot. There is this idea that people have that, oh, well, other people have it worse than me, so I shouldn't complain. At least I have a job, or, I am broke, but at least I'm getting unemployment, or I hate my job, but at least I'm employed. There is something to be said for the idea of expressing gratitude and learning how to lean into that process that is useful and sometimes a good part of people's self-care routine, but you don't have to be the saddest person or have the worst circumstances in order to have valid feelings and emotions. Feelings and emotions are a fundamental human right, and you always have the right to feel however the fuck you feel about things. That does not entitle you to behave however you want to behave, but if you're struggling with your job sucking or feeling isolated during quarantine or your friends being dickheads or feeling lost with work or whatever, like all of those things are valid enough of a reason for you to feel some type of way. You don't have to have a good enough reason to feel how you feel. It's just how you feel. It is really hard to have people in your life though that invalidate that, because having that conversation and trying to explain to somebody that like, these are my feelings and I have a fundamental human right to feel how I feel, that doesn't always go over well. So sometimes that can be an area where boundaries are useful to help you love somebody from a safe distance and to maybe not expose yourself to people who are going to say things like that when you're trying to talk about how you're feeling. And so maybe it would be a good time or good option to explore sharing your feelings or your experiences with people who are willing to actually hold space for that and be validating of that.
Speaking of dickhead friends.
Okay, question number 5.
Suddenly lost friend group, no idea why, feeling worthless, not worthy of friends. They block them on all social media platforms as well.
That's so sad. Okay, I mean, yeah, this is something that's happened to people that I work with, and this is a really hard one because a lot of times when more than one person in our life makes this very demonstrative move to exclude you, it feels like an objective fact that it must be me, right? There must be something wrong with me. And there is something to be said for being willing and able to do active and objective, as much as humanly possible, objective introspection about, did my behavior hurt someone else, Was I willing or able to hold space for this person's emotions or my friend group's perspectives and opinions? But especially with really dramatic demonstrations of removing a person from your life, usually there's something else going on there. And I hesitate to make a judgment about like who's right or who's wrong, because like this is obviously just a stranger on the internet who wasn't even speaking directly to me. But a lot of times when stuff like that happens, it's usually a concerted effort by other people who are feeling insecure, feeling othered, feeling uncomfortable, trying to exclude the person who made them feel insecure, othered, or uncomfortable. That doesn't mean necessarily that the person who got blocked on social media, that doesn't mean that what they did was wrong. Sometimes that behavior, especially like really, again, like very dramatic behavior, is an indication that somebody tried to set boundaries or tried to stand up for themselves, and people don't like that. That's one of the things that I tell all of my clients before they embark on the boundary setting journey, that boundary setting is lonely, and you might find yourself having to set more and more distance with people that you previously were seeing and spending time with a lot, because once we start to set boundaries, people start to get kind of shifty, kind of angry with you. But when people get angry with you for setting boundaries, that's usually a pretty good indicator that those were the people who directly benefited from your lack of boundaries. Doesn't mean you're going in the wrong direction. Usually, actually, that's an indicator that you should keep going. So, yeah.
One more.
Okay.
This is kind of just like a general something I noticed.
Mm-hmm.
We're all doing my scrolling, but how to love yourself.
Okay. So the concept of self-love is really complex. There are a lot of different aspects to, answering that question. I mean, you ideally would be showing yourself love and compassion emotionally, mentally, physically, sexually, and socially. But for the purposes of time, and because this is not a video about how to love yourself, the condensed version of this will just be sort of like some basic cognitive behavioral therapy stuff. The things that we think and say to and about ourselves are usually how we form our sense of self-esteem. So, for example, if I spend all day, every day, thinking or saying mean things about my body weight, it starts to feel like objective fact that my body is not worthy, that I'm too fat or too thin or too tall or too short. And so if you repeat something to yourself often enough, it starts to feel true. So one of the first things that you can do when you're wanting to work on loving yourself is to do purely some data collection and to do some observing about, what's going on in your inner monologue during the daytime, especially if you notice there's a particular time of day or activity or set of people that start to make you feel bad. Do some introspection and take a step back and ask yourself okay, what's going on? What are the things that I'm saying or thinking to and about myself right now? The sort of classic example that I give people is that if you were standing in line at a coffee shop and feeling kind of insecure because the people in front of you were a couple and they were very lovey, right? And you were like, oh God, I wish I had a person. That's really sad. And, everybody else seemed to be partnered up and everyone was kind of enjoying social time with other people and you were there alone. And then the door behind you opens and a group of people walk in and you hear them start laughing. Usually the immediate thought is, they're laughing at me. And that probably is not true, but what happened there is that your mind automatically defaulted to this idea that other people are looking at you and laughing at you and making fun of you because you're a loner, because you're not good enough to be here with your friends, because you're embarrassing, because you're fat or ugly or stupid or, whatever, any and all of the negative things that we think to and about ourselves. So taking stock of what's going on there is useful because once we start to do some observing about how often we are speaking to ourselves in a way that's maybe not so kind, we start to realize why it feels so true that there are so many negative things about us. So I want to caution anyone who's watching this, though, if you want to sort of try this, observing your thoughts thing, don't use that as an opportunity to shame yourself, though. The tendency with this behavior is to realize or recognize how often you're saying mean things to and about yourself, and then to be like, see, this is why everything sucks, because you're stupid, because you're awful, and don't do that. View this process purely as data collection and as a tool to help you develop more self-esteem, because then if we recognize, okay, yeah, I'm saying a lot of mean things about myself, maybe I should try saying some nice things about myself. Again, this is a really basic CBT principle, and it's a lot more complicated than that, and that's why going to therapy is so useful, because then you have a person who's dedicated to talking to you about the specifics of your particular scenario and, you know, about your specific inner monologue. But it can be a good place to start in terms of learning how to love yourself and to be, you know, at least more compassionate to yourself. So yeah, there we go. Those were some questions that I had, or that I coerced my husband into finding on Reddit. Again, I just want to clarify, these questions were not like directed at me. These were just things that we found that were sort of mental health related on Reddit that I thought would be interesting to talk about. So yeah, if you guys like this and you want to see another one of this, let me know. Obviously like the video and leave a thumbs up and all that stuff. But yeah, if you like these videos and me and the channel, then definitely subscribe and stick around. So yeah, if you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and then share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Friday. Okay, bye.